Good evening. In this broadcast, the information program time. The period of the crisis in the development of the economy of Russia is ending, and that signifies a transition to a new level of transformations and stabilization. The Economics Minister, Evgeny Yasin, stated, speaking today at parliamentary hearings in the Federative Council on the draft of the basic tenets and concepts on economic development for Russia from the years 1995 to 97. The basic aim of the program, Yasin called the need to facilitate stabilization in the economy and the resumption of its growth over the three-year period, although one can only count on renewed growth in the end of that period. The prime aim of the macroeconomic policy is financial stabilization, lowering tempos of inflation in the second half of the current year to between 1 to 2% a month, and maintenance of tempos in subsequent years in the vicinity of 15 to 20% annually. Today in the Kremlin, Boris Yeltsin met with a group of heads of administrations of regions of Russia within the framework of regular presidential meetings with members of the Union of Governors of Russia. During the meeting, they exchanged views on aspects of the social-economic situation in the country, budgetary interrelations between organs of federal rule, and the subjects of the Federation. The Mayor of Moscow, Yuri Lushkov, today met with the Prime Minister, Viktor Chernomyrdin. According to Interfax, the meeting dealt with financial demands of Moscow from the federal budget. This year, the government allocations dispersed to the capital set record low volumes, 1.9 trillion rubles. Just as serious, according to Lushkov, is the situation with funds for the purchase of food for Moscow. Today, the Parliamentary Commission, headed by Stanislav Govorukhin, they continued open hearings on studying the causes for the crisis in Chechnya. There, making their depositions to the Commission were former heads of Russia and the Chechen-Ingushetian Republic, Alexander Rudskoy, Ruslan Hasbulatov, Gennady Burbulis, Mikhail Poltoranin, Dokus Avgaev, and Sergei Bekov. No new facts concerning the Chechen tragedy were presented. But here are some statements. Gennady Burbulis, the former State Secretary of Russia. I trusted Johar Dudayev more than he deserved. Dokus Avgaev feels that the aim of parties and movements at the inception of conflict were alluring to a degree, behind the facade of some of them with rather sensational names. People were hiding who, even during that period, had accumulated criminal capital, and the accumulated capital caused their heads to spin. They were worried about that capital and had to make an accounting for and launder it. Hence, they penetrated government structures, and they had their own people in government. Hearings within the Parliamentary Commission will be continued. Artillery and aviation of the federal forces in the last days launched attacks on concentrations of combat technology and gunmen near the populated points Stary Atagi, Argun, Miskir Yurt. Our correspondent of was told in the press center of the command of the unified group of forces of federal forces. Near Shamyurt, the attempts of gunmen were foiled to organize a defense position. To the south of Grozny, federal forces have occupied almost the entire valley and have now directly approached the Stary Atagi. The gunmen of the unlawful formation still have control over the 7-kilometer stretch of vicinity which separates them from the city. Federal forces sustained no human losses during the last day. Today, each resident of Grozny, a city with a population of 150,000, receives only 1 liter of water per day. Such a calculation was made by employees of the State Committee of Sanitary Epidemic Monitoring of Russia, who afterwards sent a letter to the Ministry of Construction in which they asked them to restore water consumptions to levels complying with sanitary norms, that is, 10 liters per day per person. Today in Grozny there are many problems. One of them is to supply uninterrupted flow of water. People who are working here hope that the water flow will be supplied shortly. Bread is given out free of charge, but it's not enough for everyone. And apart from that, there's talk of restoring objects of Grozny which are vital for life, such as the Grozny water table. Here, there are joint efforts in an attempt to provide water flow on the parts of the Army and the Geological Committee of Russia of the Ministry of Emergency Situations. Therefore, aviation has delivered several drilling mechanisms. Bread, it's strange, is made not from usual flour, but from macaroni flour because of the shortage of other flour. On the other hand, the Army is clearing the major roads. They may be used by traffic, but any deviation to the side forbears the threat of death, undetonated shells, and at times mines planted in January by the warring sides. So it seems the restoration of Grozny is a matter for the distant future. According to Alexis Kovets, heading the staff in charge of restoration of the Chechen economy, it's not worth it to tear down now, but now objects must be made operational which in essence were not damaged during the war, that is the airport and the railway. Yet despite extensive destruction in the city, the spark of life is glowing. Refugees are returning, small markets are beginning to function. People are hoping for better days. It's more than 200 years since the establishment of the Cossack village Novorskaya. Chechens and Cossacks coexist peacefully. The Jahar Dudayev Circle has called them cowardly rabbits because they don't want to fight on Jahar Dudayev's side, and they don't do it. This refers, presumably, not to the Cossacks, not to the Chechens, but to the Cossacks, for those who have assimilated the wisdom of the saying that a feeble peace is better than a good fight, because there's no reason to fight. So many years were lived together as a large family, and as General Dudayev ascended to power, a change in consciousness of people occurred, especially the youth. We will fight until the end. What will you fight for? We'll fight for our freedom, for our homeland. With the deployment of federal forces on the territory of Chechnya, the Russian-speaking population in this and many other Cossack villages has breathed a sigh of relief because during the last years they had suffered enough from humiliation and injustice. And regarding the employees of the combined regiments of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, they have to be constantly on perpetual combat alert. Last night, this post was subject to intense machine gun fire. Those militarized gangs who are leaving Grozny are moving also along our branch, and several times during our presence here at the Novorskaya station, our outpost was subjected to attack by individuals who are unknown to us at least. One wants to believe that today there would be few people believing that a good fight is better than a feeble peace. Dialogues in Tbilisi marked the beginning of Pavel Grachev's visit to Georgia and Armenia. The trip to Georgia of the Minister of Defense of Russia is officially entitled The Work of the Minister of Defense within the group of the Russian forces in the Transcaucasus. But to meet with the personal staff was not planned by Pavel Grachev. In the Tbilisi airport, after a meeting with Edvard Shevardnadze, the Russian Minister of Defense talked about the main objectives of the visit. After the meeting with Edvard Shevardnadze, certain details of issues being worked out became known. These are questions of regularizing the Abkhazian problem. And in this area, the previous views of Russia remain in place. Georgia is a unified single country, which in the future may be based on a federative structure. Last weekend, the situation in Crimea remained calm. No acts of civil insubordination were launched by Crimeans in connection with the decision of the Supreme Soviet of Ukraine regarding Crimea, dated the 17th of March, were recorded. Interfox was told in Simferopol by the Deputy Minister of Internal Affairs of Ukraine, the Colonel General of the Militia Valery Chernyshev. He arrived in Crimea the 17th of March with 200 groups of regiments of the Regiment of Special Designation called Berkut. Today, Simferopol was disturbed by the news that a bomb was planted in the government building. There was no explosion, and fortunately, this was the only alarming news of the day. The situation overall remains calm, although people are perturbed at the forceful actions of Ukrainian authorities in regards to Crimea. It's noteworthy that today an entire throng is gathering in Simferopol in the building where the consulate group of the Russian embassy in Ukraine has begun its work. There are so many wishing to be granted Russian citizenship that this is being viewed as a type of a political protest. Today in Simferopol, Yuri Mishkov addressed the press, who doesn't consider himself to be the former president. He said that the careless, rash decision vis-à-vis Crimea could cause an avalanche of lawlessness in Ukraine itself. And Mishkov's press secretary reported that a collection of signatures has begun to express non-confidence to the president of Ukraine, Leonid Kuchma. Today, the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet of Crimea scheduled for this Wednesday another plenary meeting of the session. It's planned to form an authorized delegation to conduct talks with the Supreme Soviet of Ukraine, and to commission a judicial expertise of legislative acts adopted by Ukrainian Parliament on the 17th of March. Today in Kiev, another round of talks began between Ukraine and Russia on the entire spectrum of problems in the two-sided relations. During the two-day visit of the Russian delegation headed by the First Vice Premier Alexis Skovets in Ukraine, they intend primarily to discuss the matters of economic and cultural cooperation, although experts continue to work on coordinating basic positions in the division and basing of the Black Sea Fleet. For the signing by delegations, 6 documents are being prepared regulating economic and cultural mutual relations between the two countries on an intergovernmental level. Thus, a 7th on restructuring the Ukrainian national debt to Russia, $2.5 billion, and a technical credit of $203 million. Both these documents were initialed last Friday in Moscow and today were signed in Kiev. The acting Prime Minister of Ukraine, Yevgeny Marchuk, said that the signing of the agreement on restructuring the debt will clear the way for Ukraine to receive from the Paris Club a standby credit. The meeting of the club on this matter will be held on Tuesday. The heads of the delegations also signed a document to restore the Ukrainian debt for energy sources to the concern RAL Gazprom. During the meeting between Alexis Skovets with the President Leonid Kuchma, they discussed the question of creating transnational financial industrial groups and also joint exploitation of natural gas and oil pipelines. The first Vice Premier of the Russian government, Alexis Skovets, feels that the decision of the Supreme Soviet of Ukraine on the Crimean issue in no way will influence the progress of Russian-Ukrainian talks because Crimea is an internal matter for Ukraine. Alexis Skovets also noted that at these talks, the Russian side will not raise the question of dual citizenship. The State Duma this Wednesday will express its position vis-à-vis the situation around Crimea. This was said to the press by the chairman of the Duma, Ivan Rybkin. According to him, at today's session of the Duma Council, the draft announcement on this issue was delegated to the chairman of the Duma committees, Konstantin Zatulin and Viktor Ilyukhin, and also the deputy Alexander Shokhin, who at one time conducted the talks with Ukraine on economic issues. Ivan Rybkin emphasized that Crimea is an internal affair of Ukraine, but the fate of the Crimean people must be decided in consideration of its expression of will, or else a profound grief could result. The decision of the Supreme Rada of Ukraine should precipitate adequate reaction from Russian leadership, feels the chairman of the Duma Committee on the CIS Affairs, Konstantin Zatulin. The resolution of Ukrainian parliamentarians to resolve by the 10th of April the legal status and presence of the Black Sea Fleet on the territory of Ukraine is assessed by Duma politicians in Moscow as a violation of previous agreements on the Black Sea Fleet and as an attempt to disrupt the agreement on the return of debts. Konstantin Zatulin urges the government and the Federal Assembly to immediately hold consultations on policy vis-à-vis Ukraine. In his opinion, they must also replace Alexis Skovets as head of the Russian delegation in the dialogues with Ukraine because the latter initialed the draft Russian-Ukrainian agreement without being authorized by the President or by the government of the Russian Federation. Last year, the number of orphans has grown in Moscow by 1.5 times. Interfax was told by Anatoly Severny today, one of the heads of the Department of Education of Moscow in charge of social aid to children and adolescents. He spoke in Moscow at a roundtable meeting on the topic, ways of reforming the system of charity for orphans. The problem of orphans was previously never resolved in a dignified way and now is in a crisis phase because the previous number of children without parents have been augmented by refugees from hot points, homeless children from the former USSR republics. In Russia, there is 500,000 children without families. The Round Table of Science, Education, Culture, the Conciliatory Commission, gathered specialists to develop recommendations to renew the charity system where the basic accent now will be made not on building new orphanages or boarding schools, but to reform the system of adoption and guardianship. Hence, the new rules may be foreseen. The Round Table proposes to establish a sole federal record system of citizens wishing to adopt children based on the interests of the child, especially infants up to the year of 1 year of age. It's suggested to cut the time limit set for domestic adoptive parents to 1 month and remove restrictions such as health and age of a child if a willing family is found. The state currently cannot handle all these problems. Therefore, it's necessary to involve society and non-commercial benevolent organizations to assist. And foremost, the Round Table feels it's indispensable to improve Russian laws, among them those concerning benevolence and international adoption. The meeting of the journalists of the television radio company Ostankiно, which was held last Thursday, at which Alexander Yakovlev rejected the post as chairman, today had a no less tumultuous sequence. In the concert studio, representatives of the employees gathered, concerned not just with their fate, but with the fate of the first and main channel in Russia. A dramatic situation in the company developed after the decree of the president on privatization of Ostankino took force, which caused the staff itself to be left by the wayside. People were especially disturbed that with the formal owning by the state of 51% of the shares, the real bosses in the new Russian public television are banks and independent television companies who, in the broadcasting network of public Russian television, would own the lion's share of airtime. While all the Russian press screams about the crime of what's occurring, the government lawmakers who have written their names in gold in the trustees' council book of the public, that is, their own television, are attempting, and not for the first time in the last 70 years, to completely destroy and later to build their own new television of a closed type instead of the existing television created on taxpayers' money and hence truly a public television. In actual fact, the new television is needed not by the new Russia, but by the new Russians. We don't like the fact that the president of our country, has assumed the role of a cover-up or a roof, let's call it that, for the settling of accounts among commercial and individual political groups. The meeting unanimously adopted a resolution in which it states that the television radio company Ostankino should maintain broadcasting functioning on Channel 1 in full scale, and a state license should be issued to it. In connection with the resignation of Alexander Yakovlev as chairman of the television radio company Ostankino, the staff of the television company asks the president of the Russian Federation to view as invalid the proposal of the Russian state television company Ostankino that it should be included in the joint stock company Public Russian Television. As an initiative ensuing from a private individual without any connection whatsoever with our television company. Today, according to unverified accounts, the Association of Independent Television Producers, which includes Authors Television, VIT and RNTV, withdrew from the founding members of Russian public television. And so, what next? We just received news that today the Board of Directors of Public Russian Television appointed to the post of General Director of Public Russian Television Sergei Evgenievich Blagovolin. Currently, he is the head of the Analytical Center of Public Russian Television. Sergei Blagovolin is a doctor of economic sciences, a member of the Presidential Council, specialist in management and economics. A complicated situation with the broadcasting of the television radio broadcasting of Ostankino is developing in Moldavia and southwestern regions of Ukraine. The continued uncertainty regarding the future of Ostankino and the chronic non-payments for its broadcasts forces leaders of local radio and television networks to resort to extremes. As of today, the administration, which is in Pridnestrovia, of the Moldavian Radio Center, plans to not air programs of radio station Mayak and Radio 1. As a result, the voice of Moscow would not be heard in practically all the countries of southeastern Europe, in Moldavia and southwestern parts of Ukraine. And only because of the resolute decision adopted at the last moment by the leader of Pridnestrovia, Igor Smirnov, broadcasting does continue. And yet it's fully evident that the threat of suspension of Ostankino broadcasting may be completely lifted only after deciding the fate of the television radio company itself. In Belarus, meanwhile, problems connected with sources of mass media could become the objects of renewed friction between the president and parliament. Pursuant to the decree of the President of Belarus, yet another dismissed editor, the third, is Joseph Seredic, who headed the Narodnaya newspaper, the central publication which broke all records in subscriptions and popularity in the Republic. The reason for the dismissal was a letter of a reader publicized in the Narodnaya newspaper, which, in the opinion of the President, calls for violence and civil confrontation. Journalists of other Belarusian editions this time did not fling themselves to comment in defense of their brother of the pen, evidently awaiting a reaction from the Supreme Soviet, whose printed organ is the Narodnaya newspaper. The former editor-in-chief is its deputy. Considering the exclusive prerogative of Parliament to decide the fate of its printed publication, the decision of the President is viewed here as a violation of legislation. No feasibility or logic consideration can serve as a premise for violating law. In my point of view, this is an axiom which should be clear to everyone. Work has unfolded in liquidating the effects of the accident on the Trans-Siberian oil pipeline in the Irkutsk district. Because of the fact that the majority of the fuel has concentrated itself in natural depressions of the topography along the line, an attempt is being made to pump it back into the pipeline. An operation has begun to burn off 800 tons of oil, which is on the top of the ice of the Kurzanka River and spread over a distance of more than 1 kilometer. The cause of the accident was determined. Intertas reports that because of various brands of steel welded onto the seams 20 years ago, 3 openings formed, allowing the fuel to seep out onto the ground. In the beginning of March, information agencies reported sensational news about the bankruptcy of one of the largest defense companies, Izhmash. Our special correspondents gathered interesting information about the occurrence on site. At Izhmash, they say that even an unloaded Kalashnikov fires once a year. And it was such an unexpected shot, which was fired into the backs of the staff of the company by certain sources of mass media recently, who reported that Izhmash is bankrupt. However, arriving in Ivzhevsk so as to get to the bottom of the situation, we were convinced that the shot was not coincidental, but well planned and targeted. Today, Izhmash is the only company in the country which did not close down its productivity of the world-famous automatic weapons, carbines, and combat sniper SVD rifles. Also soon, launched into productivity will be the new Nikonov automatic rifle, which, by aiming and rapid-fire capabilities, significantly surpasses the usual Kalashnikov. The film crew of Time was the first to be allowed to visit the Holy of Holies of the plant, the assembly facility. President Yeltsin has already issued instructions to prepare a corresponding resolution, but the paradox is that the government has no money to finance Izhmash at all. And apart from that, its debt to the company as of today is 66 billion rubles. Hence, Izhmash cannot pay its suppliers. Therefore, the Federal Department on Insolvency Matters of Companies recognized Izhmash as not payment capable, but not bankrupt. But that's not the main thing. The Federal Department on Insolvency Matters, after a certain while, sends instructions to the plant, according to which the government package of the Izhmash stock, that is 34.5%, will be subjected for sale as a sole package at an investment tender. That means to be sold to one buyer. The compulsory condition, according to the document, is that the investors pay off 100% of the debt of Izhmash. But the most important thing is the package will be sold for a nominal sum at the time of the privatization of Izhmash for 1.2 billion rubles. Today's real value of that package is 1.6 trillion. We categorically oppose this because how the future owner will behave will determine very much. And we think that it's not always the case that the controlling package of shares is bought in order to broaden or increase productivity. At times, it's bought to force a competitor into impoverishment. The controlling stock of Izhmash, according to this decree, may be bought by anyone from many countries of the world also producing firearms. Izhmash has become a thorn in their side. And today, the mafia structures are not exactly short on cash. Incidentally, the company may be declared bankrupt only by a court, which never occurred. So for whom was it beneficial to announce Izhmash was bankrupt? Meanwhile, the prestige of Russian weapons on the world market as previously remains high. For the second time in Abu Dhabi, the largest viewing of combat technology is underway. 43 countries, 600 firms are participating in IDEX 95. It was opened by the Crown Prince Sheikh Khalifa bin Zayed. The largest display at the exhibit is Russia's, prepared by the state company Rosvooruzhenia Russian weapons. On the first day, it was visited by tens of potential customers, dispelling apprehensions of a possible decline in the prestige of Russian weapons after unsuccessful implementation in Chechnya. In a word, interest in Russian weapons here remains high. This was reinforced also by the training performance on the polygon. Russian tank T-80U, the combat infantry vehicle and self-navigated artillery tank 100S, demonstrated superior results. The self-propelled South African vehicle was not as lucky. Well, the way to the world market is not easy. If the Russian defense sector is esteemed here, it may receive a large order for its goods of those $50 billion which the countries of the Arab Gulf intend to spend to purchase weapons. This is an exhibit which must eventually produce, I feel, hundreds of thousands of jobs in our country. And also preserve the technological chains, the inflow of funds, which is necessary not just for the current manufacturing, but for modernization. In the framework of the exhibit, an international conference of scientists and weapon producers is underway as well. The President of the United States, Bill Clinton, plans on the 9th of May to arrive in Moscow to participate in the Russian-American summit and also the celebrations on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of victory over fascist Germany. This was told to the journalists by high-placed representatives within the White House who asked to remain anonymous. According to them, the official announcement about the imminent visit could follow within the next few hours. On the year of the 50th anniversary of the annihilation of fascism, Europe today made another significant step on the difficult path of strengthening its security and closer coexistence among the peoples of the continent. Representatives of 52 countries of the old world gathered in Paris for the final conference on stability in Europe. Together with the end of the Cold War, many problems vanished, which contributed to schism in Europe, but new ones emerged, especially serious border and ethnic matters, which were primarily the task of the starting conference last year on the stabilization of Europe, which was organized in France's initiative. Since then, chaired by the European Union, and the regional roundtables on Central and Eastern Europe and also the Baltic states allowed the participants to achieve progress in resolving two-sided problems, achieving agreements, establishing between them bonds of friendship and neighborliness, which together with the general declaration of the conference were entered in the Pact of Stabilization adopted here today. Contribution of Russia to developing the Pact together with its participation in the Baltic roundtables was incorporated into several mutual agreements. In essence, the Pact, just as separate conferences in significance, according to the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia, Andrei Kozyrev, was the first attempt to give a truly new answer to problems of post-confrontational Europe. Regarding the questions of European security and plans to broaden NATO, the Minister emphasized that those undermine the previously agreed on course of European partnership, including partnership of Russia with NATO, and it, if it's given a chance for at least a few years, will probably likely contribute to solving the problems of Europe and NATO, considering the nations, so the interests of all the nations of the continent. Today, the official visit of the Queen of Great Britain, Elizabeth II, to South Africa began, symbolizing the return of South Africa into the membership of the Commonwealth after general non-racial elections. Navigating around the Cape of Good Hope, the Royal Yacht Britannia entered the Cape Town port, where a triumphant ceremony was held. The Queen of Great Britain, accompanied by the President of South Africa, Nelson Mandela, went to the Parliament building, where she spoke at the joint session of the National Assembly and the Senate. 2 people were killed and 6 were injured as a result of shooting at an Israeli commuter bus near the city Hebron on the west bank of the Jordan River. Responsibility for the crime was assumed by the Palestinian Islamic movement Hamas, which is against the dialogues with Israel on Palestinian autonomy. Anonymous terrorists during the morning rush hour attacked 16 stations of the Tokyo metro station with warfare nerve paralyzing gas, the agent sarin. 6 died from severe intoxication, more than 1,000 hospitalized. Units of chemical defense of the armed forces are working on contaminated wagons and buildings. The gas caused loss of breath, nausea, and a spontaneous loss of sight. One by one, passengers began to collapse and in a state of unconsciousness, and only the quick actions of the emergency rescue crews and the police kept to keep down the list of casualties. Evidently, the terrorists used homemade bombs installed in wagons or at turnstiles where usually large crowds accumulate. Experts established that sarin gas was used, developed by the Nazis in Germany before the Second World War. The government of Japan feels that behind today's gas attack there is a criminal organization. Just now, our correspondent has returned from the Space Flight Control Center. In the flight control, there were few journalists, although this was the last press conference with the 2 space crews. In one day, Viktorenko, Polyakov, and Kondakova will land, and the Russian-American crew will calmly continue to work on the station. An interesting question was asked of Polyakov. Now everyone is following him. Imagine 1 year and 4 months of life in space. How many changes occurred on Earth during this time? He knows everything, has observed everything. He wants to return. But will his body, after landing, be able to adapt to life on Earth? As a philosopher, he evaded a direct response. For now, it's still in an experimental stage, but he knows exactly what our country is doing in space. Do I want to return to earth or remain. Beside you and behind your back, there are hundreds of people, and they have paved this road, and I have merely traveled it a little further, and we're trying to pave it and research it. And I'll attempt to convince our taxpayer that to finance space research is a matter of knowledge and discovery. We can't regress into the Stone Age. We must preserve our pioneering spirit and greatness. This is an interesting question, and I'll be happy when I meet with you to tell you even more interesting things. It was pleasant that the cosmonauts saw everyone in the flight control center. Therefore, they watched the screen so attentively. 3 of them haven't seen people for a long time. The marvelous musician, Sviatoslav Richter, today turned 80 years of age. This event is the cause of the evening function in the Museum of Fine Arts, Pushkin, where friends and colleagues of the master were invited. Richter himself is abroad these days and will return to Moscow no earlier than May. Boris Yeltsin and Viktor Chernomyrdin today congratulated the musician on his birthday. Each one of his concerts becomes a top event in musical life. His energy and imagination are extolled, and he always offers his audience creative interaction. Among the multitude of praises for his talent and confessions, there are the words of his teacher. The success of Richter in any auditorium is based on trust in the best aspects of the human soul. Recent evidence of that is what the festival he recently organized in the city of Toulouse, created to support young musicians and artists and architects. The December evenings, a brainchild of Richter, are the unforgettable celebration of art and music. It's just a shame that the maestro rarely visits Russia. During the last years he's been living in Italy. Incidentally, the French have called the compact disc produced by the Philips firm, with concerts of the pianist of the last 30 years, a monument to the living Richter. Sviatoslav Richter, unfortunately, almost never gives interviews. He feels that everything which he wants to reveal is in music, and only in it he sees the predetermined purpose of serving elevated beauty. In a moment, Anatoly Malyavin awaits you with the sports news. With this, I bid you farewell. All the best. The final accord of the World Championships in Canada sounded victoriously in honor of the 26-year-old Italian Silvio Farler. In the 50-kilometer race, he beat Bjorn Deli from Norway and Vladimir Smirnov. Good evening, and yet the Russian team is stronger than everyone else. Our skiers on the Thunder Bay slopes achieved a noteworthy victory. The 29-year-old Larisa Lazutina from Moscow returns home with 4 gold awards. We'll congratulate also Yelena Verbe with 2 gold medals. She won the World Cup in advance. The Masters of the Alpine Skiing have summarized the winners in biathlon. Congratulate our Russian biathlonists who have won, despite the French, who have won in the relay race. And among the women, despite the French victory on the last stretch, the cup went to the Norwegian team. An unprecedented alpine victory was achieved by the 3-time Olympic champion Vreni Schneider from Switzerland this season. She won 2 small crystal cups in the slalom and giant slalom. The alpine competitions this season were under the banner of the superior Italian Alberto Tomba. The King of Slalom has 2 victories in Olympic disciplines as well. A 7-minute, 7.81 second record for the short track masters in the relay. The Canadian team has become the world champion in Norway. And they're also recognized as King of Speed and is the veteran of motor racing this week. Per Olof Seremis, the 47-year-old racer, has achieved the world championship title for the first time, beating Alexander Barashov from Moscow and Vyacheslav Nikulin from Dolnogorsk. The handball players of the Volgograd Rotor have made a sure step toward the finals in the European City tournaments. Vishy Anand beating Gatokomsky in the 9th match is ahead 5-4. The rival in Spain have 3 matches to go still. In the battle for the semi-finals at the International Hockey Leagues, Metallurgist beat the Wings of the Soviets 4-3. Dynamo's Avangard 7-3. Salavat Yulayev Torpedo Yaroslavl 2-1. Torpedo Nizhny Novgorod Lada 1-2. Next match on the 23rd. Under the Spartak flag, the joyous start for the young athletes, 6 years and up, together with parents, the Spartak's sport competition mother-child in Moscow's Znamensky. More than 300 most athletic families from all over Russia participated, a good initiative of the Committee on Physical Culture and Tourism and the Spartak Society, which in 1 month will celebrate its 60th birthday.
Добрый вечер.
Good evening. Tomorrow is the 21st of March, the spring equinox day, and that means that the astronomical spring will begin. Despite the arrival of spring, tomorrow's weather will not be pleasant for the residents of European Russia. Here, a broad cyclone reigns, therefore in the Murmansk-Arkhangelsk regions and the Republic of Komi is previously cloudy, with some isolated snow during the day, -3 to +2 degrees. In the northeast of Komi, it's cooler, -2 to 7 degrees. Same weather is expected in Baltic states, in the northwestern area, the central and Volgovyatsk area. At night, 0 -3, during the day, 0 +5. Belarus will be under the influence of that same cyclone. Here it will be cloudy and windy with some brief periods of snow, turning to rain. Temperatures during the day will not exceed 5 degrees. And another cyclone will define tomorrow's weather, but it is not quite so broad, but a lot more active from the Balkan Peninsula to Ukraine and Moldova. And it will bring with it rains and gusty winds, day temperatures of +4 to 9 degrees. In the Krasnodar, Stavropol, Remarius, and in the Rostov district, it's warm, +10 to 15 degrees. On the Black Sea coast, it's up to +22 degrees. But in the afternoon, the weather will worsen, the clouds will increase, westerly winds will increase, and torrential rains should go through. Unfavorable weather should affect the northern Caucasus area as well. Meteorologists expect partly cloudy skies, no precipitation, and +10 to 15. Same weather beyond the Caucasus as well, but here it's warmer, +13 to 18 degrees. Over the lower Volga, it's mostly clear skies with +12 to 17. And the residents of the central Volga area will be less fortunate. Here it will be rain, wet snow with temperatures of +1 to 6 degrees. In St. Petersburg, tomorrow also cloudy and windy with some patches of snow during the day, 0 +2. In Moscow, also cloudy with some brief snow during the night, -1 to 3, during the day +1 to 3. And that's all about the weather for tomorrow.